Hello. Welcome, everyone. It is March 1st. I know last week I was like, it's already March next week. That's so crazy. And then I looked down today and I was like, oh my gosh, it's 3/1. So happy March. I feel like in Houston, we typically just jump from winter to summer. So it's already like 90s here and it's toasty. I'm not sure where y'all are, but I know there's a snowstorm kind of wiping across the US. So hopefully you guys are, well, and not everyone's from the US either, but hopefully y'all are enjoying nice weather and or hopefully it's coming soon. Or if you're getting a ton of snow, hopefully you can at least enjoy the beauty of it, despite the fact that the climate of it may not be too fun. But so excited to see y'all. We love you guys, and we're just so happy to be here. Chris and I today are going to be doing an Ask the Expert. So this is really where we're just going to answer questions. We're going to talk about topics that have come up recently that we think are important, and we're really just going to be here to provide guidance, education, and resources. Of course, it's important to remember that these live streams are not intended to replace therapy and should not be us giving therapeutic specific advice, but instead we're giving education and support for those of you with OCD, anxiety, or related disorders. Please remember, if you're feeling in crisis, suicidal, or unsafe, to go to your local emergency room, call the suicide and crisis line at 988. Or call 911. It's important to remember that IOCDF is an incredible resource for support, and we are an incredible organization that helps give back, but we are not a crisis line. And if you're feeling unsafe or suicidal, we want you to take the steps you need to take to stay safe. Chris, it's so good to see you. Happy March. Tell me a little bit about California weather, because I'm seeing some crazy stuff on the news.
Yeah, no, so it is pouring out here. And so today's the last day of the storm. It started last week. But if you're from California, you know we're not used to it. So there's actually like snow up in like LA, Santa Barbara area. There's been pouring rain. And then the problem is people don't get rain out here, so nobody knows how to drive. So either people go like 5 miles per hour or they go 100 miles per hour. So you're supposed to drive slower when it's raining, obviously to help with brake time and stuff, but not 5. And people will still speed at like 60, 80, 100 when it's pouring. So it's a mess out here. But yeah, there's nothing you can do, right? Like, you just got to sit with it. And then luckily it's supposed to end today. So tomorrow I'll have my life back, the normal weather back.
I'm happy to hear that. I will say, growing up and living in Houston, we get a lot of rain, so we know how to drive in the rain, but not everyone does. And we just find the same thing. People go like at these snail speeds on the freeway that are so dangerous, or they're just flying and you're like, you're going to fishtail. This is also so dangerous.
Yeah.
Where's the in between? Yeah. So important. So anyway, good to see you. Good to see everyone. We're already seeing lots of questions and lots of folks joining. I love seeing so many people. Grace and Eric from Texas, Tati from Florida. Make sure y'all tell us where you're joining from so we can say hi. Today's live stream, unlike some of the others, is going to be a live stream where you can put your questions and we're actually going to answer them. The past couple weeks, we've had some lunch and learns, so we've had guests on like Fred Pinzel, and last week we focused on eating disorders. And so we really had a specific pre-submitted questions and agenda that we wanted to make sure we got to, but today this is all about y'all. And so our job is going to be answering questions live, but also to kind of, I don't know what the right word would be. I want to say like fluctuate. That doesn't make any sense. What am I saying? Going back and forth between our document with pre-submitted and live questions. What word is that?
Yeah, no, we are going to rotate between, isn't it rotate? We're going to rotate between.
Rotate works, but I was just like, I had a word and I'm like, it's gone. So who knows what it was.
Yeah, no, but I'm excited. You know, we feel bad. We always feel bad when we don't get your questions. But one thing I promise that we do once we sign off is any questions we don't get to, we copy to a document. And then when we get pre-submitted questions, we do. So today we're going to jump in your questions. And my hope is that everybody that joins us live or that has pre-submitted questions or has been in past lives, your questions will be answered. And we are hoping that that provides education, community, and information.
Exactly right. So good to see y'all. Thank you for joining. We're going to start with live questions, then we'll hop to pre-submitted and just kind of go back and forth. So let's hop right into Chloe at 11:08 your time, Amanda. And thanks again to Amanda. I always want to give shout outs to this incredible IOCDF staff and those that are on the background that y'all don't see that make not only these live streams happen, but that also work so hard during to give us questions and keep us up to date. So at 11:08 your time, Amanda, and thanks again from Chloe. Also, Why with OCD can you have all the evidence your obsession isn't true, but your brain won't register it? I keep using logic, but nothing seems to work. I love this question, you guys. My husband is an engineer, and he's always just like, okay, well, let's just be logical. If someone has a fear of HIV, they should just go get tested. And I'm like, we're talking about an OCD fear, Matt, not like a real fear where someone actually like testing would be warranted or they're at risk. And he's like, yeah, but still, like, you can just go get tested and you would know you don't have HIV. And I'm like, yeah, until the next doubt comes up within 30 seconds that what if it wasn't my blood work? Or what if now during the test I got infected with HIV? And what if I'm not within the right window? And OCD will latch on. And what we know is that logic doesn't work to break down OCD. It actually gets us more stuck, right? We've talked a lot about how solving things gets us stuck. The more we try to figure it out and answer it, we get more confused. And so we know that logic doesn't work for OCD. Chris, hop in.
Yeah, so the two big things that I want to point out, Chloe, is one thing is called confirmation bias. It's something I talk to all my clients about when we start the education process. So the idea behind confirmation bias is your brain, when it really wants to be right, and in this case, OCD wants to be right, it's going to pick up on evidence and it's going to completely push away anything that goes against your obsessive thought. So if I have an intrusive thought that I'm going to harm someone, it doesn't matter if I've never harmed someone, would never hurt a soul, I'm a kind person, all those things. The OCD is going to dismiss that and almost like block that evidence. And it's going to pick up on like, well, people snap and people get angry. And remember when you were 5 and you got really mad and you like broke your sister's Barbies, and it's going to collect that faulty evidence and keep bringing that to you. The second thing is the part of the brain that's activated when we're suffering from OCD, especially when we're in it, is not the part of our brain that can use logic, rationale, figure things out, plan things, etc. It's that more reptilian, prehistoric part of your brain that only can make quick actions to either keep you safe, which we call flight, or to attack, which we call fight. So that's the fight, flight. Sometimes we say freeze. So the problem is, I always tell my clients that part of the brain doesn't speak English, it doesn't speak any language, it only can learn through behavior. And that's why behavior, ERP is a cognitive behavioral therapy. The behavioral component is the only way that part of the brain works. So I know it's so tempting to use logic and rationale, especially when you're calm, but when you're in it, that logic goes out the door. And that's why we have to make different choices and have a different relationship with our thoughts and our feelings versus trying to convince our thoughts and feelings that they're wrong. OCD is always going to argue back and forth anyway, so it won't matter.
One of the questions I get a lot is like, why can't we use logic? Why can't we just, these things, like, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And what I always answer with, and this is kind of my thought around one of the reasons why I think ERP is just so important and critical, is I have never yet been able to see someone with OCD talk themselves out of their OCD. Whether it's with logic, whether it's by telling yourself it's a fake story, whether it's by trying to convince yourself cognitively that it doesn't make sense. I've never seen people, and maybe, I'm here and open to be proven wrong, right? But it's very rare that we're able to just talk ourselves or convince ourselves through it. And for most of us, we've tried that. We've tried that for a long time, or we tried that first and it hasn't worked, which is why we're still getting stuck.
Yeah. I mean, I knew rationally that I was never going to harm my grandma and my sister. In fact, I was extremely protective of them. But when I would be in my anxiety state, in that loop around them, it would feel so real. And so logic didn't work in that moment. And so what I had to do is kind of just trust myself. And I would deliberately spend more time with them, which is what I wanted to do anyways. Those were my values. And so when I'd spend more time with them and I was around them longer, I actually learned through doing that I would never hurt my grandma and my sister, but I had to be willing to do that. But I knew deep down, so logic never worked.
Yeah, the logic does become a reality when we are doing ERP, right? So it becomes logical, it becomes a reality when we're doing ERP.
Yeah, and you learn, and then you start to realize over time. I mean, I think sometimes people are like, oh my God, do I have to just never know forever? It's like, no, now I know 100% I would never harm my grandma and my sister, but I had to do the work first to get through that doubt, that uncertainty, that fear. And now that I have, I'm very clear. So you will get clarity. You just got to kind of go through it to get to the other side.
Totally. From Grace at 1156, I've seen your videos on OCD. It's not OCD staring. It's not talked about a lot. How can we spread awareness for OCD staring? Chris, I'll let you take this one.
Yeah, so Dr. Jonathan Grayson actually did a really good live stream that you can see over at the YouTube, IOCDF's YouTube. So if you go to iocdf.org/YouTube, there's a really good live stream that Dr. Grayson was part of. He also did a survey for individuals that deal with it. I dealt with it. I've been kind of open. It's probably one of the more embarrassing subtypes that I dealt with. But how mine manifested is like my brain would say like, don't stare at inappropriate places on people. Don't stare at inappropriate, usually like private areas. And of course, what do we do when OCD is yelling at us? We give in because that's all we're thinking about. And so it was very embarrassing to find myself kind of staring and having to look away and stuff like that, especially when I worked at a gym. That was really hard. But luckily, the treatment works. What I think is we're overdue anyways. I don't think John Grayson has been on our stream in a while, and he's a big friend of of the stream. So we should definitely have him back, and then additionally have him talk. It doesn't have to necessarily be a lunch and learn, but I think it'd be good for you, Grace. I know a couple other people have asked us about it. We could have him on for just ask the experts, but also bring that up. But you're right. I mean, I think that's a big mission that we have to continue to do here at the IOCDF is make sure that all subtypes and all aspects of how OCD manifested is definitely represented. I know for me, I didn't even know it was OCD until later on in the literature. So
totally. Yeah. So in Lucy at 12:01 your time, Amanda says OCD private and peripheral staring carries such a specific stigma of shame attached with its sufferers even being accused of committing sexual harassment. How can this perception be tackled? You started to talk a little bit about this, Chris, but can you share a little more?
Yeah, so the way that it happened for me is like an example would be, let's say I was, I'll never forget one of the times that I got caught and I was super embarrassed is I was talking to someone and their dad's fly was unzipped. And I only knew that because with staring, you stare at private areas that are, you're not supposed to stare at. And for some reason, I could not stop staring. And I kept staring and I kept staring. And finally he looks down and he's like, oh my God, and luckily because it was unzipped, he like zipped it up and he's like, thank you. I figured you probably were like giving me a hint because you kept looking down there. And I was so embarrassed because actually what was happening is, like I said, I fought it. And that's the biggest mistake we make with our OCD. I fought it. So if I was like, I remember when I was in school, when I would go on the van, you'd kind of just sit there and there'd be like a bunch of students around, everybody's on their phone. And it's like, I kept like fighting it. And like the way I think about it is my brain was like, don't stare at her breast, don't stare at her breast. And then all you do is do that. So what I did is I stopped fighting it. I really was just like, you know what? I'm going to look at it. I'm going to get caught because I can't seem to stop anyways. And once the pressure was gone, it was like, oh my God, I have control. But there is a lot of stigma. I think there's a lot of stigma with this disorder in general. We all feel like we're pedophiles. We feel like we're harming people. We feel like we're sexual, we're staring, we're doing inappropriate behavior. And I think that the more advocates, the more literature, the more talks we can do on continuing on the taboo topics, then we can let people know like we are the opposite of what we do and what we think. And we feel so ashamed about it, whereas somebody who's doing inappropriate behavior feels no shame and does it willingly and gets angry when they get caught because they want to keep doing it. So there's a big difference in values in all of that for us.
Totally. Next question for Moonchild at 12:07. I'm obsessed with becoming bad, and I have a great desire to know how people become bad and what people are considered good. I also want to know why these thoughts exist in my mind. Is finding the answers to these questions wrong and making the obsession worse? So I'll answer quickly and then Chris, feel free to hop in. But I think at the end of the day, if this is your OCD, anything you do in an attempt to solve it, to understand it, to know it in more detail, to research it, to Google it, whatever it might be, is going to give it more power. All right. Again, remember, you guys, what we're trying to do is change our relationship with anxiety and OCD. We are trying to make sure that we are not telling ourselves or sending the message to ourselves that our thoughts are dangerous. And so if we're researching them, if we're Googling them, because we need to know more, we need to understand, the message that we're sending is you have to figure this out. You have to solve this. You have to understand this or it's bad. And therefore you're going to get more and more stuck.
Yeah, Moonchild, you answered your question for sure. So a big OCD core fear. So when we talk about core fears, there's a lot of surface stuff, but there's certain core fears that we come back to, and it's important to know because that's sort of like the hub. And it sounds like for you, if we were to sum up your core fear, it's that you may become bad, or you might be bad and just don't know it. So the problem is by you researching, I don't know who specifically, but it might be serial killers, it might be like crooks or thieves or politicians that were looked as bad. While you sit there and compulsively check that, the OCD, once again, when I was talking about confirmation bias, isn't going to look at the information neutrally. It's going to completely nix anything that you read that's, like doesn't relate. You're going to toss aside, but you're going to find one or two things and you're like, I do that, I've done that, that's me. So then what happens when people have this subtype is they start to feel really bad. So what they do is they punish themselves because they're like, well, if I'm a bad person, I deserve to be punished. So we can see that by isolation, by not allowing yourself to do fun things, by constantly beating yourself up, negative self-talk. And then what it does is it just makes you feel bad. So what you would want to do is, it sounds like response prevention would be the first start. So any of the research that you're doing to get information on how people become bad, you want to stop answering those questions. You will feel reckless at first, and you'll feel like you don't care. You'll feel a little bit like you're being, you're dropping the ball. There's a word, I can't think of it, but you're dropping the ball. And what we want to make sure is that we don't fall for that, and we don't go back to our once you stop compulsively researching all of that, etc., then what you're going to start to notice is it's not on your mind as much. And then what we're going to ask you to do is stop punishing yourself, stop putting yourself down, stop treating yourself like you've done something. I think that's what we all do with OCD is we treat ourselves as if we are our thoughts. And then because we're punishing ourselves or avoiding children or not driving or avoiding church, then it feels like it's real. So I promise you that the OCD is what's making you feel bad. It's not your actions, choices, or behaviors. Because if it was, people who are bad don't worry about it. They don't research it. They're just bad and they're fine with it. It sounds like you obviously are afraid of becoming something. You're not there yet, so you don't need to punish yourself.
Right. Next question is, first of all, so many people having great comments and saying thank you, and we appreciate that. But the next question is from Lucas at 1208. Hello from Germany. With religious OCD, how can I know the difference between intrusive thoughts and real doubts? Chris,
Yeah, I would say, my dad is very involved in the Catholic Church. He's very religious, and I've talked to him a little bit about it. I've never dealt with scrupulosity religious-wise. It was more moral scrupulosity for me, but I've talked to him about it to try to get insight so that I could be clear for my clients. And one of the big things is there are definitely questions that people have being part of the church, and there's questions that people have with their faith. But what you will notice is that those are general questions that most people in the faith have. And they're not in an urge or a rush to figure it out. And they don't feel guilty for having questions and wanting to get answers. And there's not this like panic that if they don't figure it out, they're a bad Christian or a bad, Muslim or anything like that. The difference is when I talk to clients that have scrupulosity, it's like, I got to find these answers. I had some doubts. That means I doubt God. I'm a bad person. I'm going to hell. Like there's these extreme outcomes. There's these extreme consequences. And so that panic, that need to know, that urgency, that overestimation of danger, overestimation of consequence, that is OCD. So what I tell clients to do is take the religion out, because the religion is going to make you feel like it's important because everybody cares about their faith. Start to notice the way that OCD is speaking to you, that doubt, that urgency, that you need to figure it out. You got to answer. You need to know tomorrow. Faith is not something you're going to figure out by ruminating in your head. So make sure you know the difference between that kind of compulsive fixation, that rumination, versus just genuinely being curious about your faith and wanting to get answers that most people in your, in your congregation have as well.
That's right. So I've dealt with scrupulosity for a long time, on and off. And what I think is interesting for us to note is that doubt is not only normal, doubt is healthy even in faith, right? When you think about doubting Thomas and some of kind of the big biblical stories, what we know in general in life, that when we're in a healthy way, right, we're engaging in healthy doubt, healthy questioning, we become more sure of things, right? When we are kind of exploring and understanding where we stand in a relationship, we might become more convicted in that. It's the same with faith. The difference with OCD is that the doubt often feels super urgent. Right? So like, I need to know this answer now. I need to understand this today. I need to figure this out immediately. I need to get reassurance for it. I need to answer it. compared to like, I'm trying to understand and explore something, you know. And I think in general, whether we're talking about scrupulosity or not, that's really one of the defining characteristics of OCD, is that it is this urgent, anxiety driven need to have an answer immediately versus we're truly just trying to understand something, right? So it's kind of like the difference between that feeling of like when your boss sends you an email that says, come see me, your boss sends you an email that says, hey, can you pop by my office? I have a question about this case and a billing related concern. And you're like, oh, okay, like still, I hope I didn't make an error, but like I'm not as worried about it because I know what it is, compared to the first is like, oh my God, am I getting fired? I need to know right away. I need to go straight to their office and drop what I'm doing and hop off this live stream. Great questions, you guys. Love these. Hi, everyone. Philadelphia, Florida, you name it. All right, so down to Tati at 11:10. Is it common for someone with 12:10 your time, Amanda? Is it common for someone with OCD to have obsessions and compulsions about someone else? I broke up with my girlfriend recently and we're trying to repair, and she shared that her OCD is doubting me and trying to find evidence that I don't love her.
Yeah, so Tati, so one subtype of OCD that I struggled with was, I was going to say religious because we were just talking about it, is relationship OCD. So relationship OCD is where somebody doubts the relationship. It doesn't always have to be romantic. It typically is. And it's where somebody doubts a relationship. It could be doubting their love and care and affection for another. It could be them doubting their partner's care and affection towards them. It could be doubting the relationship altogether if it's the right one. And so what somebody has to do is, the thing about it is OCD asks questions we can't answer. There is never a way that I am going to know that the person I end up with is the right person for me. In fact, there's belief systems out there from psychologists that study this stuff that you have like 10 or 15 soulmates out there, right? So there's never going to be this like perfect person. I think our OCD gets influenced by Disney movies where you're going to find the person and get married and have a castle, right? And so the problem is when people have that, it sounds like your partner is having that, is that the OCD is doubting that you care and love for her. Now you're going to be tempted to give reassurance. Of course I love you. Of course I would never date anyone else. You're the right person for me, etc. The problem, as we all know, is reassurance becomes like a drug and your partner wants it more and more. And because they're getting reassurance, they stop trusting their information, trusting themselves, because they're like, well, I don't know better. I need to ask my partner. So what I would say if I was in a room with the three of you is for you to really reduce that accommodation and to reduce that reassurance. And for your partner, what I would say is like, focus more on repairing the relationship, what you guys are doing in the here and now. And over time, if there's certain obvious signs that your partner has fallen out of love that we all would notice, sure, maybe make a choice then, but don't go searching for something. That's what we do with OCD. We go searching and we almost try to convince ourselves that OCD is right. So Tati, hang in there. But yes, it's definitely something that OCD impacts for sure.
Remember, OCD is the doubting disease, so it can attack anything, especially things that are important to us. There was a couple other questions, but it looked like, Eric, you gave great feedback around ACT and ERP helping for you. So let's hop to... there's a question about Spravato. I don't know anything about Spravato. Do you, Chris, or should we skip that question? It looks like you do. So Michelle, I think that it's probably a medication is my guess. So we're actually planning to have a psychiatrist on soon to do medication part 2. So if that's a medication, Michelle, we will be happy to answer some specific questions about that when a psychiatrist is there, but neither Chris or I are qualified to answer those questions.
Yeah, what I'm going to do, Michelle, is I'm copying it. We have a sheet back here. We actually confirmed that we're going to have a psychiatrist come back and do one of these Ask the Experts pretty soon. I don't have the exact date. Amanda might, and we'll give it to you before the stream is over. But I just put that on our medication list. So we'll definitely want to answer it. Real quick, if I could jump in, Liz, because somebody had asked about ERP earlier and then Eric jumped in. I think for a lot of people, if you're struggling a little bit with ERP, the reason ACT helps a lot of people is because ACT kind of it's a framework for the ERP. And I didn't know much about ACT, but my therapist used it with me and I never knew it was ACT until I became a therapist myself. But it really helps you see what you're doing in the lens of like values, what you're trying to set up for your future, to see to let the thoughts be there and accept their presence without having to jump on them, to commit to choosing a life of one that's not giving into the OCD. So a lot of times if people are struggling really with like exposures and they're getting so caught in the nitty gritty, somebody who incorporates ACT can present it in a way that makes a lot more sense. And so my therapist did that. It was never about like, you got to get better, you got to get better. It was more so, hey, you really miss having friends and you've been isolated for 3 years now. How can we get you back to being around people? Oh, okay, these are the barriers. Well, let's work on that. And so you can be out during the day, you can interact with people. So hopefully that's helpful.
That's right. Then there was a question from Uncle Stalin. I'm struggling to read what the actual question is. I know that it sounds like you're feeling like you're having intrusive thoughts a lot. And is there I can continue in medicine? So I'm not sure if you don't mind rewriting the question, we will get to it.
I think I understand it. So they said they've been agnostic, but they doubted their belief and converted back to Islam. But now there's huge intrusive thoughts occupying their time. And I think they asked a question before, they work in the medical field. And so they're saying like, is that something that they can do while still having like intrusive thoughts over should they have gone to Islam, should they be agnostic, which one's better? So maybe you could speak to like how we can still have intrusive thoughts and still function and still do big things. I think sometimes people think they have to have an absence of thoughts to function.
Yeah, right. So I think the big piece here, you guys, is us recognizing that the intrusive thoughts are not something that should cause us to make decisions around, right? We shouldn't be making decisions, making choices based on our intrusive thoughts. We should be making decisions and choices based on our values, based on how we feel from our heart when we're quiet, right? Not based on our OCD or anxiety or an intrusive thought. And so the big piece is like, you can do whatever you want to do. You should be engaging in whatever faith practice you want to be engaging in that's true to you, but don't let it be decided on by OCD or anxiety or intrusive thoughts, right? Let it be decided on by you and your values. And that's what we're teaching everyone, right? Is how to live the life you want to live, how to live by your values versus living by OCD or anxiety, making those choices.
Well said, well said. We have a question at 12:15 by Can TT on YouTube. It says, is having ambition to be perfect at what you're doing come from genes, or is it something that you can learn for your parents? So I get that question a lot. So I'll ask it to you first, Liz. A lot of times people ask, when my clients have perfectionism, they'll say, my family has it. Some people have it. Could it be learned from that? Yeah. Sometimes people ask, are there symptoms because their family's religious? Like maybe you could speak on like how sometimes real life can influence some of our subtypes and how sometimes it has no correlation whatsoever.
That's right. And I think what's really important, you guys, is that we don't over pathologize, right? So my dad is a workaholic and so is my mom. They've instilled that in us and ingrained it in us. And I love to work. I kind of, Chris is a workaholic too, and we love to find passion in it. Neither of us would say our work and the amount we work is due to our OCD or perfectionism, right? Because again, it's not driven by anxiety. It's driven by, desire to be doing this work, and it brings us pleasure, it brings us enjoyment, and we really like, it's a choice we're making, right? It's values based compared to being anxiety based. And I say that just because I could easily be like, oh, I work all the time and that's my anxiety, where it isn't my anxiety, right? It's actually a values based desire for me. And I've learned how to transition some of my work and to put boundaries in place now that I have kids, and that's important to do. And that's where it's really clear to me that it isn't OCD or anxiety driven, because I can be flexible and I'm able to practice flexibility without that being triggering or being scary. And so what I want to say is that I think there's a mix of all of this, right? What we know is that OCD, if we have OCD, our kids may have about a 25% chance or so of having OCD. We know that there's a genetic component. We know that there's a strong genetic component. We also know that OCD is not environmental. So nobody gave you OCD. You didn't get OCD because your parents told you to use a barrier when you open the door and then it made you have OCD. But that could be a learned behavior that you have. Right. So there are people who don't have OCD but use barriers because their parents did, or that's what they told them to do. But again, it's not necessarily triggering and dangerous and anxiety provoking. It's more of just like a system that they do or a behavior that they've learned from their parents. Right. My sister has zero OCD, you guys. She's on opposite spectrum as I am. but she doesn't like shoes in her house. It's not an OCD thing for her. She doesn't like people wearing shoes in her house. And my nephew, who's 5, right, knows right away when you walk in the house, like, I need to take my shoes off. So whatever house he walks in, it's just a habit that he does. This is not him learning OCD. It's him following patterns or habits that he sees in his home. But again, there's a difference between it being anxiety driven of like, if he walks 10 feet in the house, now we have to clean that section of the floor, compared to, oh, it's just a preference to take your shoes off, or like, oh, please take them off. That's kind of gross. So 2 different things. And it's important to know that. So what we know is that anxiety and OCD definitely has a genetic component, and sometimes perfectionistic traits, hardworking values traits that are instilled in us by our family members could be something that's a learned trait, right? For my work ethic is definitely a learned trait, right? Like, people all the time are like, Liz, why do you work so much? You need to slow down. Where I don't even think I work that much, because compared to my parents, I don't. They still work harder and more hours than I do. And so again, there's a mix, right? I don't want us to over pathologize that like anything we do that feels like, oh, we're really driven or we're ambitious, this is bad, this is my OCD. It doesn't have to be. And if it starts to become anxiety or OCD, and we start to find, so for me, I have found that sometimes my anxiety, my work is never my OCD necessarily working, but sometimes it's avoidance for me of like, oh, I want to stay really busy because I'm afraid to get quiet, because if I get quiet, I have to deal with intrusive thoughts. And that is something where it's like, okay, then I purposely need to slow down and get quiet. So again, I didn't give a clear answer because there isn't one. There's no way to know what it is in this case, but I think it's about differentiating. Is this a value and a preference and kind of part of my personality and who I am? And do I think it's beneficial? Or is this OCD, which is unwanted, disruptive, disturbing, and there's no part of us that wants to hold on to it? And once we figure out what category it goes in, we can kind of understand where it may come from. OCD, this hand, I guess it was, genetics, right? Where preferences and values may be more influenced by family relationships, our culture, that sort of thing.
Yeah, you answered it perfectly. I always ask my clients, is this helpful or not helpful? I will say one thing a lot of clients will tell me is the reason they are so ambitious, or the reason that they do such well work, is because of OCD. And I stop them right there. Never give the disorder credit. You are good at what you do because of the effort that you put in. OCD sometimes will hijack that and take it to an extreme. And then that's when clients are up all night studying or rereading books over and over to try to get the perfect answers. But at the end of the day, when OCD gets out of your way, your intellect, your ambition, and I don't like the word perfectionism, but your hard work and your desire to do well, that's not going to disappear.
That's right. And I got this question. I did a speech last night on OCD and anxiety at a big church out in Sugar Land outside of Houston. And one of the questions someone came up to me later is they're like, but do you think having OCD has some good qualities, right? Like Chris was just saying. And my answer is that those of us with OCD, we know that we have higher creativity, higher intelligence, right? And have really great qualities that differentiate us from others. But the OCD isn't important in that mix, right? When you remove OCD, it doesn't remove those great qualities. It allows those great qualities to shine because OCD is not taken away from it. OCD does not bring benefit. It is not a positive thing in people's life.
Well said.
Except that it can build resilience. I think that's the point, right? Is that we can learn, oh, wow, we can do hard things and get through it once we've faced our OCD. Next question at 1223 from Afsana. I have 2 autistic sons, 17 years old, has severe OCD, and a 22-year-old who has all OCD traits. The 17-year-old is completely out of control with his OCD and anxiety. It's really bad with 24 hours, rituals, and nasty compulsions. Most of the people are discouraging me to do CBT and counseling. Doctors and therapists told us it would not work for them. We're very frustrated. I'm a big fan of the foundation. Any help you can offer?
Yeah, I would say the first thing, Afsana, and once again, maybe Amanda could put it in the chat, is we have a live stream coming up about autism and OCD. It's actually going to be hosted by Dr. Rebecca Sachs, who does a lot of really good work with individuals with autism and OCD. I do know that some of the live streams we've done in the past on autism and OCD are available over at YouTube. So if you go to youtube.com/IOCDF, if you go there, you'll notice that if you just type in the search bar autism or ASD, there's a lot of really good talks, and there's that one coming up. I believe it's in a month or less. So maybe Amanda could put that date. What I find when I work, I have family members with autism. In fact, my nephew does, and he has OCD traits that we're trying to parse out. What can sometimes be difficult is, as you know, what they call stemming with autism is it can be repetitive behaviors. For instance, my little nephew, if he goes to a playground, he'll go up the stairs, he'll walk across the bridge, go down the slide, and then go there. And he'll do that for hours unless we intervene. But he's happy, he's laughing, that's fine. Then when he feels he gets really bugged about like my dad touching certain things, and he's contaminated and dirty and stuff, that's he's like crying, he's frustrated, etc. So we can see the difference in the behaviors. One is my nephew enjoys, he loves to look at wheels and roll it back and forth on the floor. He likes to eat the same foods, but then there's certain things that cause him distress, and that's how we can tell the difference. I find clients do really, really well with cognitive behavioral therapy. It's very direct, it's very, very behavioral, which a lot of them have already sort of been getting in schools. A lot of times people use behavioral techniques with individuals with autism. So I'd be interested, if you're still watching the stream, if you could maybe put in the chat what it was specifically that they didn't feel was going to be helpful. I actually find that clients with OCD and autism do really, really well in treatment. They are really good at following directions, and they're very logical. And once they can kind of see that the behavior they're doing doesn't make a lot of sense, they're usually willing to work on it. So I'd love to hear what specifically they felt wasn't a fit for treatment.
Yeah, and what I will say is that there are providers who specialize in autism and OCD, and they specialize on the comorbidity. We have live streams on this, and you can find providers that do both. I would encourage you to find those providers. I don't want you to just go to clinicians that would say no, because you really want to go to someone who specializes in the integration of both. And then also, if your 17-year-old is at a point where he's ritualizing that much, you may want to consider a higher level of care. And Neurobehavioral Institute, John Hoffman there really specializes in the integration of autism and OCD on an intensive level. And so that is an option for a program that I would recommend if it was my own kid to be able to go to and get really good help on a more intensive level. So there's lots of options. Please don't be frustrated, and there's amazing resources available. Matt B at 1224, how many virtual conferences are there with the foundation this year? As I'd like to advocate, is it possible to join from the UK?
Yeah, I know we have the hoarding conference coming up this weekend. So if you or a loved one has hoarding disorder, please join us this weekend, Saturday and Sunday, so that you can go to iocdf.org/conferences. Then we know in October, we're having the virtual conference. I do believe in May, we're having the Faith and OCD conference. And then the Body Dysmorphic Disorder Special Interest Group, we're kind of brainstorming to come up with a virtual day event. So I would say that as far as I know of right now, those are the virtual conferences the IOCDF is having. As for advocating, the cool thing about those is you can absolutely advocate. So they haven't opened the submissions yet for the online conference. I believe they're coming up in this month or next month. But please go ahead and submit. What I'd strongly suggest is finding a couple other advocates or people that want to speak on OCD, or find like your clinician maybe or psychiatrist and put forth a panel. It's hard because so many people apply to speak at the conferences. It's hard to get a talk approved. Liz and I wouldn't even get a talk approved if it was just like us by ourselves wanting to talk about something. So you want to make sure that you kind of get people together, reach out to people you respect and say that you'd like to share. But Matt, we'd love to hear your voice. We'd love to hear new voices. We love to hear new perspectives. We love to hear international voices. We love diversity. So please, please, please. As well as other things that you can do is become a grassroots advocate. You can apply to be an IOCDF advocate. And there's a bunch of different things that you can get involved. So I tell people, get involved with the foundation. We're going to be the voices that make change. So please, please, please join us.
Totally. And I just want to kind of reiterate and hop in to just say that there are so many opportunities, and we want to help you with that. So don't feel like I want to advocate, I want to talk, but I have to like do this my own and figure it out. Reach out to us, because those of us that are advocates, it's not just Chris and I. There's so many people that are advocates for the foundation that want to help and support and show other people what our advocacy journey was like. So we'll go back to Michelle. Michelle, it sounds like you're really struggling with religious scrupulosity, and your question was more that you feel like your provider isn't helping you, that medication's not helping, and ERP only goes so far. One of the things I want to hop in and say is, obviously I don't know the case enough to give any details, but I think it's really important, you guys, if we find that an outpatient level of care, so like medication, outpatient OCD treatment with a good ERP provider who really knows how to engage in OCD and ERP treatment, isn't moving the needle for us and isn't working, we want to start thinking about higher levels of care. So this can include intensive outpatient programs, partial hospitalization, which are day programs, or residential programs. It's really important to keep that in mind. What we never want anyone to think is, oh, this outpatient level of care isn't working, so now I can't get better. You absolutely can get better. You may just need more intensity or a different frequency to help move the needle. If we find that when someone's going to outpatient therapy, they're struggling in between sessions, they're not able to complete their homework, that should be an indicator for a provider to say, you may need something more, you may need something different right now, and we want you to consider that. I believe we've done a webinar on higher levels of care. I actually just did a podcast with Kim Quinlan on it that will actually come out this Friday, so you can check that out as well, where I talk about what would be some indicators, what would make you consider, what should you expect at a higher level of care, that sort of thing. Please don't give up, and please know that there are always ways, y'all, that we can adjust treatment. If the ERP approach we're using isn't working, we can add in ACT, we can add in other options, we can work with your psychiatrist to adjust and change your medication. Never ever lose hope, because it's always available, and there is never a treatment that is a last resort or our last chance. We can always keep making changes, keep doing something new.
What I want to add really quick, Michelle, one thing is we have a lead advocate by the name of Katie O'Dunn, who specializes, she's a reverend, and she specializes in working with individuals that have both OCD and religious themes, so like religious scrupulosity. So maybe, Amanda, you could put either her website or her name, but I would recommend contacting her. One thing that I find, Michelle, that really helps people with religious scrupulosity is getting their church involved in the very beginning stages in that kind of psychoeducation stage. So for instance, a lot of times the client will come in and they're not really willing to listen or engage in CBT and ERP and ACT and mindfulness in anything, because they just don't feel like I have any authority, which I don't in the church, right? And the goal of getting your religious figure involved is not to give you reassurance, to not be there throughout the treatment, answering all your questions and answering them every week. It's more so for them to recognize and to explain to you the difference between your faith and the OCD, and give you an understanding so that you can sort of let your faith be your faith and really treat the OCD as OCD. And therefore, once you realize it actually has nothing to do with your faith, it's all an obsessive compulsive disorder, then I find that clients are willing to really lean in where they didn't before, when they thought they were doing something negative against God.
Totally. There's so many questions and I feel a little bit lost.
Yeah, real quick, if I could answer real quick, just because, like I said, family, Afsana, at 1227, you talk about ABA therapy. So, some people have different opinions about ABA therapy. My big opinion is just make sure you have a really compassionate and loving provider, because sometimes old school ABA therapy can seem a little bit abrasive, but my nephew, for instance, has thrived, and he has ABA therapy. He has OT, which is occupational therapy. He also has speech therapy, and we have seen him go from almost nonverbal to non-functioning to not wanting to be touched to almost being mainstreamed and doing great. The great news is that ERP has a lot of behavioral components that are similar to ABA, so clients pick it up. And then, like you said, the ERP has a CBT element and is going to address your son's thoughts. So please trust that the treatment could definitely help.
Betsy at 1228. If my therapist doesn't use ACT, is there a book or a class I can use to learn on my own?
Yeah, so I think the two people I always go to for ACT stuff, who I really appreciate, is Lisa Coyne, and then on the board of OCD Southern California is Evie Gould. They do a lot of trainings for ACT. They've done a lot of things with ACT. I can't pronounce the last name of the gentleman that does a lot of research, and it's Toig, I believe. But there's definitely some really good books on ACT. There's trainings for us therapists. I went to a training. That's how I learned a lot about it. So what I would suggest is, Betsy, if you could look up, I'll put in the private chat for Amanda to put their names up, but Lisa Coyne and Evie Gould, I knew that they've done something on ACT therapy, and it's something that you could potentially, I'm going to put the link, actually I found it, put it in the chat, but that could be something. They actually have a 18-minute Facebook video that they did on ACT that's free that you could watch. But a therapist will definitely know about ACT because it's something that a lot of us have integrated into our treatment. So it's definitely something that they could learn more about. And then when we go to the next question on the back, I'm going to look for a good ACT book and put that in the chat as well. But I feel like ACT is such a great combination with ERP, especially when people are really struggling with content, they're struggling with direction, they're struggling sometimes with why to do something. I think it's really helpful.
Yeah, and what I'll add into there is that you don't have to be an ACT specialist to often already be integrating ACT in different ways. And so, but some people definitely have more background than not. Down to Mill Street at 1229. How do you differentiate between OCD and delusions? My doctor doesn't know. This is a great question, and this is one that can be really difficult to answer. We actually had Dr. Hudak from Pennsylvania actually do a recent lunch and learn to my clinicians on this so that we could really break it down. So Chris, I think it would be great for us to add that to our list where we could really talk about OCD and psychosis, and then when we see it come up and what it's like. The biggest difference is, do we have insight and recognition to acknowledge and notice that these thoughts are unwanted, we don't want them, we don't believe them, but our OCD is making us question if we believe them and if we want them, and we're doing these rituals to get rid of them, right? So it's important to remember that individuals with OCD are not hearing like commands, or they're not visually seeing something, and instead it's a thought that's popping into their mind, and the thought is intrusive, it's unwanted, they don't want it, they don't believe it, they don't want to believe it, and so they want to do things to try to get rid of it. That's probably the biggest kind of feedback I can give, and then I would love for us to have Dr. Hudak and some of the experts come on.
Absolutely. I would say I agree with everything Liz said. I think the biggest thing is you'll hear us a lot of times as therapists say ego syntonic and ego dystonic. So I've had clients misdiagnosed for OCD and come in having OCD, and the difference is they absolutely believe their thoughts. It's typically around religious themes of nature, being possessed, being in purgatory, being in hell. This isn't really Earth. This is really like a projection from, it's themes like that typically. And they've been on a lot of medications, including antipsychotics, which help sometimes with delusions, but they still really believe it. And that is a very different treatment than OCD. Most clients, even with severe OCD, have some understanding that the thoughts are ego dystonic, meaning they disagree with them, they don't want them, they feel like an outside coming in, trying to change them kind of thing and make them something they're not. So that would be the biggest difference. I would definitely say that it's important to know the difference, because somebody who absolutely is hearing things, is seeing things, is experiencing physical things, and delusions isn't going to benefit from ERP. That's a different disorder. So I think Liz's idea is perfect to get a specialist to come on, but I hope that gives you at least a little bit of understanding.
Totally. So I'm going to answer a couple questions without us having to put them up. For those of you that are talking a little bit about like, can I still live my life with intrusive thoughts? Absolutely. Don't let intrusive thoughts make decisions for you, but also don't accept that we have to just be okay with intrusive thoughts. We can engage in treatment so that our intrusive thoughts can lessen and have less power. One of the questions was, after healing from OCD, could someone have collateral damage like memory and recall? I have not seen that happen. I've not seen any studies or research to my knowledge about after OCD that there being any belief that it causes any sort of brain damage or memory loss or any sort of memory impairment or damage. So to my knowledge, the answer to that would be no. For those of you that are saying like treatment costs a lot of money, it does, but there is amazing resources. There's options. Go to iocdf.org. You can click find help. You could click options like sliding scale, certain insurance that you have, so that you can have providers that can show up within that area. And then you can also think about going to some of the OCD clinics in your area. A lot of places, like for us here in Houston, the Houston OCD Institute, we're a training institute, which means we have sliding scale options with students. If you find like clinics and centers that train and have students, you often can find discounted rates for individuals that are still supervised by incredible clinicians.
And don't forget the live stream we just did with Alec, or if not Alec Pollard, the one we just did with, why is his name slipping now? Fred Penzel, yes. As well as go to our live stream that we did, I believe it was a week or two ago with Fred Penzel. We talked all about how to navigate insurance and how to navigate low-cost treatment. So he is a plethora of knowledge. He gave his contact information. Please, please, please go there. I also real quick see a comment about hoarding in the chat. Don't forget to go to iocdf.org/conferences. There, Afsana, you'll see we have this really low-cost hoarding conference this weekend that it sounds like it'd be great for your sons and for your family.
Yeah, it's this weekend, so definitely check that out. We've gotten through all the questions, and we could jump to live stream questions, Chris, but it may be nice to just spend a few minutes just kind of chatting and giving some other feedback and advice, if you're okay with that.
Yeah, real quick, I see one that says, can someone get disability because of OCD? I don't know if you've navigated around that. I know that I've had clients try to get Social Security and things like that, and it's very difficult. I will say that I got temporary. My OCD was so bad that I was not non-functioning. I got temporary disability. It wasn't a lot of money. I believe it was about $600 a month, and it only lasted for 12 months. So I would just kind of check into that because temporary disability, what it did is it helped us with some of our treatment costs. But I do know that some people have a struggle getting like actual like disability. Sometimes your work, because it is covered by the ADA, you can get some like adjustments in work. You can get some of that. But like Liz always says, is definitely make sure that you don't use that constantly. It's not designed to be something where you just never get treatment or never face it. It's more so to help you temporarily get back on your feet so you can do the work.
That's right. I think that people can get disability for OCD, and I actually would say that not only is it potentially going to be temporary, I would only want it to be temporary. You know, I think it's really important for us to recognize that despite having an OCD diagnosis, with proper treatment, we can live a full life. And I don't want anyone to accept or believe that they can't be functional, they can't hold a job, they can't live the life that they want because of their OCD. Now, yes, we might need temporary support while we're getting treatment if we're disabled, but what I don't want us to do is accept disability because of our OCD as being our norm or what we have to be okay with. We absolutely, with treatment, you guys, can get to a place where you have freedom. You can live not just a full life while living with OCD and struggling. You can live a full life and OCD not even really be there. OCD can be in the background. It cannot be loud at all. And you can feel just like someone without OCD. We're like, yeah, you might get some random weird thoughts, and sometimes you might kind of question what they are, but behaviorally, you no longer respond, and they don't stick, and they don't have the power, and you can get to a point where you may not even meet criteria for OCD anymore, which is pretty awesome and an amazing place to be. So the message I want to send, and then Chris, I'll let you take it over, is that help and hope are always available. And what I mean by that when I say that is that recovery is possible. You're right, Matt. You can reclaim your life and live by your values. But what I don't want anyone to hear me saying is that we have to accept a life where we live by our values and we really struggle. I think sometimes people think that the message is you can still do hard things, you can still live by your values while experiencing really hard things, and that's kind of the best we're going to get. That is not the best we're going to get. We don't have to accept that, okay, because of my OCD, I can do fun and great and awesome things, but I'm going to struggle along the way. You can do fun, awesome, great, values-based things without having to struggle along the way. That's what we want you to get to. That's what we want you to fight really hard for.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's going through my head right now is like, you know, when we do these live streams, I always am like, just recognize that people are really, really struggling, you know, and I hope that people see some of these different resources that Liz and I shouted out, that Amanda's putting in the chat, that y'all can kind of download, you can read, you can look at. You know, I think one thing that for me, I don't feel like I was a special case, right? Like, I don't feel like I was super mild. I don't feel like I had some kind of special gift. I just think for me, it's like you get fed up, you get tired of this disorder, and you get to a point where you recognize the havoc it's created. And what I made sure to do is find a therapist. I know a lot of people were talking about cost. Our family had no money. Like, we had no Christmas gifts. My mom wasn't eating because we were using, because we just didn't have the finances and stuff. But one thing that we did was we just made it the focus. Like, we just knew that I needed to go and I needed to do the work. And the way that I looked at it is like, I was living a very fulfilled life. And then the disorder hit me, and I slowly started giving into it until I gave into it fully. And I knew when I went into treatment, all the things that I did, the way that I was addressing my thoughts, the way that I was addressing my, intrusive images, the way that I was behaving, had led me to get this place. And the only way to get out was to start to learn more about the disorder, to understand how it tricks me, to understand how it works, to kind of get confirmation that it's all made up and I'm not in danger. And then I was going to have to make different behavioral and lifestyle choices and really understand that I needed to fight to get my life back. And I think the reason that Liz and I are workaholics and we do these, volunteer our time for these live streams is because we don't want people to think that you're going to have to suffer for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. We're going to hopefully have John Hirschfield on a live stream coming up. He wrote a really good article about the way that the treatment has morphed and adapted over the years. And I think it's something that Liz and I both related to reading is like, we're always going to talks, we're doing talks, we're going to conferences, we're getting updated. Find a therapist that's really up to date with the latest treatments, can connect you with somebody on the medication side if you need it, the right level of care. And then just trust that if you really, really follow the work and do the work, you'll get better. Last thing I'll say is one time somebody asked me, like, how do you know if a client's going to get better? They were somebody that was reaching out. They were newer to OCD therapy. And I said, they show up, they want to get better, and they do the work. There is no way that they're not going to start to see relief. So you got to be consistent and you got to stick with it. What do you have to say, Liz? Because I think sometimes we see the people that feel like they're going to suffer forever. And I know one big thing that you've been really kind of wanting to make sure that the advocates sort of say in the foundation is that recovery doesn't look like struggling forever. And I think sometimes people are thinking that that's kind of their life.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what's really important is that, because I was there, right? I was in this place where I had gotten ERP and I had learned how to be able to be successful while really struggling. And I started to accept and believe that like that was the best I was ever going to get. And that was doing great, right? Doing great would be like making it to work and holding a job while still struggling with OCD. And what I want to say is that those of us with OCD, we're the ones that have the power to change that. We can change our relationship with anxiety and OCD, not just change it enough to function, but instead change it so that we can have freedom. One of the questions that got asked to me last night was, well, doesn't it feel sometimes like the solution is harder than just giving into the problem in the moment? And my answer was like, yeah, it does. But the difference is when we give in, we keep ingraining it and we have a bigger problem we're going to have to deal with later. And that's going to keep impacting our life than if we do what's harder right now so that it has no hold on us in the future. And it's important for us to remember we are fighting for freedom. We are not fighting for functioning. And I think across the board, a lot of people send that wrong message.
Beautiful. I can't say anything better, so I'm going to let it be. I'm going to let you mic drop that one right there.
All right.
The only thing I'll add is please support the conference this weekend. If you or a loved one does experience hoarding disorder, the IOCDF virtual conferences are incredible. So go to iocdf.org/conferences. And then Liz and I won't be back next week because it's a research roundtable, but the following Wednesday we'll be back to answer your questions. So I know we didn't get to any pre-submitted. We got to all the virtual, which will make Liz and I happy, but we'll definitely get some of your pre-submitted. But come back in 2 weeks. We'd love to hang out with you and answer your questions and provide community.
Thanks, y'all.
Take care, everyone. Have a great Wednesday. Kick OCD's butt. It sucks.
That's right.